Hello there. This evening I'm going to be chronicling my descent into madness. So, when Games Workshop decided to blow up the old world, back in Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition, my dwarves went into their case and they sat there for many a year. Not quite gathering dust because they were well protected in foam during that time, I'll have you know. And then the old world came back and the dwarves could come out to play. However, the paint jobs didn't necessarily measure up to not only modern standards in general, but also my own painting standards. Because most of my dwarf army was painted, let's see, round about the year 2000, when I was but a fresh-faced youngster in the wargaming world. And I didn't do a lot of highlighting back then. I was really big on washes, plenty of washes, but that's not going to cut it. So I thought, you know what, if I'm going to get these dwarves out for the old world, I'm going to have to add some extra highlights onto them, or at least fix up some of the weird mistakes that I made back in the old days when I was painting them. And as time went on and I was adding highlights to more and more units, I started going further and further. So this is the descent into madness, because when is a miniature finished? And the answer is either never, or when you're sane enough to say, now it's finished, I'm going to stop here. Because you can just keep going. You can keep adding things to a miniature indefinitely. So we're going to look through various units in my dwarf army, in fact all of them that I've added paintwork to, starting with the ones that I've done very little to, and then working our way up in chronological order. And here we go. So, these hammerers. Now, obviously these weren't released back when I painted my original army, so these were painted around about, when were these guys released? About 2014, 2013, 14-ish. So, a good decade old. And what issues did I have with this paint job? Well, it's not quite as bad as some of the old ones, but the skin tones are quite flat, because all I've really done is a wash. So you've got some recesses, but you don't really have any highlights. And the beards, they're not too bad actually. You'll see some really weird beards coming up in a minute, but these ones are okay. Just not really striking, because there's no real highlighting going on there either. It's just washes again. And I decided to fix that. So let's have a look what I did with my hammerers. First of all, it's a much better lit picture for a start. But other than that, you can see that I've mixed up the skin tones a bit. So I've highlighted the ones that are supposed to be this kind of Caucasian colour, this paler colour, and then I've added some darker skinned dwarves in there as well. And you can see the drummer there has also gained some eyeballs. So the eyeballs on this unit didn't go too wild, because you can't really see their eyes under the helmets unless you get right down to their level. So I decided I was only going to do the eyeballs that you can actually see, because at this point I hadn't gone totally insane yet. And I was thinking I'm only going to do a couple of little touches on each unit just to make them look a little bit cooler, ready to put them on the battlefield in the old world. And obviously the movement trays are new as well. But I also highlighted the banner a bit, because that looked a bit flat in the old days. It was just blue with a wash slapped over it, which was pretty much my painting style back then. And the beards and the hair have had some highlights added to them. You can especially see on the grey beard there, some nice highlights. And this isn't as far as I'm going to go with this unit in the future, because you'll see what I do with the next ones along in a minute. Another thing I would maybe like to do to this unit as well is add a highlight to the purple weapon shafts as well. That's fairly flat. Now, let's move on to... oh, we've got a close-up there. So you can see he's got eyeballs, but these guys haven't yet. If you get right down to this level, you can just about see the eyes, so I'll probably add those at some point. Then onto these Ironbreakers. So, this picture does not make them look very good. This is how they were painted in the year 2000. And what are the issues here? Well, I think the silver looks quite dirty because of the overuse of washes that I did back then, but that's okay because they are Ironbreakers. They're supposed to be down there in the tunnels fighting the horrible rats and whatnot. So I don't mind that the armour looks a bit grubby. But The eyebrows on the helmets. Now back then, obviously I've painted them as hair, but they are actually supposed to be decoration, because there's a bit of the helmet that actually extends further down than the eyebrow. So unless they've cut out little eyebrow slots in the helmets, which I'm led to believe they haven't done. And also, what I've painted as mustaches are actually supposed to be mouth or mustache guards as well, so that's supposed to be armour. So going to be fixing that. Other than that, the beards are obviously weird. Look at these blonde ones that actually came out kind of green because of the washes that I was using back then. The orange ones look a bit more brown. They're a bit too muted for my liking, so they're going to be brightened up. So let's have a look what happened to them. And there we go. Look at that. So lovely, bright, highlighted beards that stand out now. If we just switch back there, very grim, and then suddenly, boom. Adds a lot more energy to the unit, those beards. And I have fixed the eyebrow and the mustache situation as well, so they're now part of the helmet, very clearly, which they were supposed to be. And that's pretty much all I did to this unit. And that is a very small amount of work. Although, when I was doing the beards, I did have to kind of repaint them entirely. If you look at this, that's not much to work with there, just this green mess. So I did have to paint them like entirely yellow or orange and then work up from there. So it's yellow and then a wash, but not such a ridiculously green wash as the one I used back in the day. This wash was... Let's see, I don't know if it was a contrast. I think it was the old shade, the Cassandra yellow, which I don't know if that still exists, but I've still got some. And then highlighting up from there with progressively lighter yellow getting towards the edge of the beard. But nothing too wild yet. These are fairly simple highlight jobs. Then we get onto the miners. So this is where it starts to get a bit crazy, because I like these models, but I don't think this paint job does them justice. I think they're very cool. I think I did a decent job on the candles back when I painted these guys. So these would have been painted when I was getting back into 8th edition. So these are about 10 years old, these paint jobs. Same as the hammerers-ish. And a Dwarf Lord of Legend there, who is definitely not done justice with just this entirely silver armour and the flesh wash issue that we've got, with everyone being this kind of sunburnt look. So, let's see what I've done to these. And there we go. So the candles, the flames on the candles in particular, I've had some extra work done to them to make them look a bit more realistic. Highlighting of the blue clothing. Highlighting of the beards, which I've gone a little bit further with on this unit, as you can see. And everyone's got eyeballs. What about that? This guy looks a bit deranged. And I find it easier, actually, to make... If the eyeballs are too small, if you make them look to one side, that's a good tip there. Because you don't have to worry about getting them perfectly centered then if you're going all the way to one edge. And then if you spill over when you're correcting it, you're just correcting it with the skin colour rather than back and forth with the black and the white of the eyeball. So it's less messy if you make them look sideways. That's a red hot painting tip for you there. And then this guy has obviously had lots of highlighting done. The horns on the helmet have been painted. He's got some gold added to his armour now. His shoes are no longer just silver. That is a huge transformation on this guy. And his beard's been lightened up. And the eyebrows. I just really like this model. I think it's very cool. Very appropriate as a miner champion because he does have a pickaxe. This Dwarf Lord of Legend. It's a shame that miners aren't that great in the game at the moment, from what I've found. And the blue highlight is just on top of the original base coat and wash. I've just added a single highlight to it, which is not as far as I'll be going on some of the other units. I've also brightened up the top of this banner as well. This kind of totem emblem. That would have originally been possibly tin bits colour there. So I found that a bit too dark, so we've brightened that up a bit with a bit of a brass colour. Then, let's keep moving. So you can see the beard's looking better and better each time now. And oh, look at that lovely rear shot of the miners as well. By the way, anyone who's watching this live, feel free to drop a comment in there. This is a live stream after all. So we're on to the Dwarf Warriors. These were painted around 2000, and they've got the same green beard situation that the Ironbreakers had. I don't know exactly how that happened. They would have been painted yellow, and then the wash must have been... Maybe I'd used some kind of flesh wash on them. Something, anyway, that made them come out this weird greeny colour. So all these beards are going to get brightened up, and the clothing is going to be highlighted, all the blue. Brighten up the banner a bit, and also there are some eyeballs that can be added to this unit as well. Some of them have these closed helmets on, where you can't really see the eyes anyway. Obscurminator, looking very good. Highlight is making a huge difference. I think the slightly bright green bases detract slightly. Yes, you have to love the old goblin green bases though. That's the one thing I'm sticking with resolutely in this army. Keeping the old classic base colour from the 90s. Just trying to make it look like an army that was just painted well in the 90s. Stu says, they look great. The real question is, do you have enough pots of goblin green? Well, there was actually a wild shortage of goblin green, and I'm talking about Vallejo goblin green, because obviously the Citadel one is very difficult to come by, but that's basically the same colour. But I couldn't even find the Vallejo one. Everywhere was sold out of it, but I did manage to get a couple of pots on Amazon, actually. So I'm not going to run out anytime soon. So, Dwarf Warriors. Let's have a look at the transformation there. So you can see lots of beard highlights. Eyeballs have been added. And obviously if you go too close on the eyeballs, then you start to see that they're slightly imperfect. I should have been zooming in on the other pictures, really, shouldn't I, as well? Although it's not that flattering to the paintwork if you zoom in that close. The human eye isn't meant to do that. We've got Perfidy in the chat as well. Good evening. So what I've also done with this unit is brightened up the symbols on the shield and just neatened up the shield as well. Because if we go back and look, I don't know if you can really see in the poor lighting of the original photos, but the shield colours aren't the neatest. And the silver symbols on the front, the anvil with the hammer, I think you used to get like 3 or 4 different symbols that you could put on the shields. But I've brightened those up a bit as well with some silver, and I've also painted the little nubs here sticking out of the shield. So it just adds little bits of extra colour here and there to brighten them up a bit. Added some more paint to the top of the banner. You can see where I haven't cleaned up the model originally where I painted it there. I decided I wasn't going to try and remove any mould lines because that would mean a full repaint then. And that's more than I'm prepared to do because I just ain't got time for that. Stu says there's a company called Coat d'Arms or something that make paint pots that are a colour match for 90 GW range. Yeah, there are quite a few good approximations of the classic colours out there. I think that company you've mentioned, is that the one that used to actually make the paints for GW? It could well be. Now you can see we've got some more variety of skin tones in the unit as well now. You can see this one's a bit darker than some of the others. And there we go, I'm liking the beards. And as I'm doing each unit, I'm starting to get slightly better at figuring out how to paint the beards, rather than just doing one flat highlight all over. You can see it's becoming kind of a gradient with little bits picked out here and there. And on these ones where it's kind of these long hair strands, that's where you go full on gradient. Dark at the top, coming down to the light colour at the bottom there. The blonde ones are more speckled on this bit of texture on this particular head here. I really like these old Dwarf Warrior models. I might actually prefer them to the ones that came slightly later that had the more Viking look. And there is actually something else I've done to this unit since taking these pictures as well. I've painted the horns on the champion's helmet in a bone colour, but I don't think there's a photo of that right now. So, we're going further and further, adding more highlights. You can see the clothes have been highlighted a bit. Now, the gyrocopter. I really like this model, and it went 10 years without breaking, but one of the rotor blades did actually start to droop the other day. It is pinned though, so it was easy enough to put it back in place. Now, the painting for this, back in the day, I think it's a cool colour scheme. It's just base coat and wash though, so obviously it's not that interesting. Until we add highlights. So, obviously, all the fabric parts of the contraption have been highlighted, and this is the first time I've done this little trick on any of them as well. This is the first one I tried this on. So, the first highlight, which I'm covering most of the area with and only leaving the recesses in the darker colour, and then using an even lighter colour to just highlight the edges of the recesses. So, which you can see on the top, I've also gone and just picked out around the dark parts as well, which I think is quite fetching. I think that's a very good angle. Raphael says, very nice army. Thank you. I also highlighted his beard in there as well and just neatened up a couple of other bits here and there. And it's not that much work. On a model like this, it was a little bit more because obviously I'm going around adding all these fine lines, but it's not taking a huge amount of time because most of the work's already done. The boring work's done. Base coats aren't that exciting. This is the bit of the painting process that generally makes models come to life, so that's the most exciting bit. And when you're adding it to an old army, you're just jumping straight into the fun part. So it doesn't feel like a chore, this bit. Then we've got the grudge thrower. Now, this model, I bought this, let's see, when would this have been? I think I bought it around 2008. During a very brief period that I was dabbling with adding to my dwarf army, but then I didn't fully commit for another 3 or 4 years, and it actually had the back beam of the stone thrower missing, so I had to just make my own out of green stuff and then perched a little beer tankard on it to disguise it. So we'll see if we can identify that it's not an original part of the kit when we see some other angles of the repaint. But again, it's the usual. A bit heavy-handed with the flesh wash, not highlighted any skin. The beards look a bit flat as well. And this is actually the wrong crew for the machine here. This guy isn't supposed to be there. He is actually from the cannon. You can see he's stepping on a cannonball. So he'll be replaced when we get to the photo, I think. There we go, so it's supposed to be this guy. And I really like this beard. This might be one of my favourite beards in the army. I really like the highlight work on this one. And it's starting off with the yellow, going in with the wash over the top of that, and then doing kind of a gradient highlight, but then doing these, it's because it's not just solid strands of hair all the way down, and you do get that on the modern GW hair actually. You get lots of solid strands of hair, like on Ghosts, you'll see that from GW quite a bit. But in some of these older models, they have more texture to them, so it's not just one solid piece of hair that runs all the way down there. So where one strand ends, you can kind of add a little highlight to it. And I think this is a very good example of that. And then when you get right to the edges, you can add an even lighter bit as well. So you can see that on the eyebrow. So it's kind of a gradient, but also you want to not just do a straight edge highlight. You want to speckle it around as well. And I think that's quite a nice effect. The machine itself, I've just lightened up the wood mostly. Because it was, if you look here, it's very dark, very dingy, no real highlights. So, added a bit of highlighting to the wood, edge highlighted the wheels, and highlighted the clothing as well. And the same trick as the gyrocopter here. So this is where I've fully gone into madness now, because I'm doing all these little highlights on the clothing that I wasn't doing when I started this repaint job on the army. So it's definitely taking a lot longer by this point, but it's paying off. And this guy might be one of my favourite models that we've looked at so far, just because of that beard. I think I've done a nice job on that. And you can see this beam here that's clearly not part of the original model, because it's supposed to have some kind of metal framing around it, but I didn't feel like trying to sculpt that out of green stuff in... When did I build this? Probably 2012, 13, probably 2012-ish. I built this and painted it. So, yeah, it's just a green stuff beam at the back there because the piece was missing. Then we move on to the cannon. So this may well be the model in my dwarf army that I've had for the longest. And this would have been during my first attempt at a dwarf army, which was mid-90s. So my main army that I played during... It may well have been 4th edition I started this army. And yeah, so very much mid-90s. You can see, look, this guy is possibly the worst offender for the overuse of flesh wash. That is a serious tan he's got going on there, with the blonde, dirty hair as well. And this is actually the wrong crew member as well. This is the guy from the bolt thrower, I think. So he's going to get switched out probably in the photos for the guy with the actual cannonball. I know he's not actually, because I took this photo before I discovered that he was the wrong guy with it. but I have put them all with the right machines now. So, the one thing that you'll see that I haven't really done yet on this one is the lens of the telescope. I have started doing that on the later models as well. But for this one, the main thing, obviously, he's been lightened up significantly. His beard has had a nice repaint as well. These ones have been mostly lightened up, added some highlights as well. And the cannon itself, I've totally changed the colour of the barrel. Because I think, if you look at it there, you can see where I've highlighted over the top of the old colour. If we go back, it's just too dark, I think. The whole thing's a bit too dirty and dingy, so brightening it up to go with the nice bright colour scheme of the army. And again, highlighted the wood so it's a bit brighter now. And it just looks a much more happy cannon, which is how it should look when it's blasting away at the enemy, I think. It's a happy time. And we've got some variety in the skin tones as well. This one's significantly darker than the others, as you can see. And then the bolt thrower. So, this is not the correct crew, because that's the guy that was with the rock thrower, you can see there. So the one with the bolt thrower should be this guy. Oh no. It is this guy. Oh yeah, I see. Yeah, so in this photo he's actually been switched out for the correct crewman, so you can see him there. This guy is the bolt thrower crew, so he's abandoning his team. And actually, I wanted to talk about him a bit more, because this guy, his beard was just completely slopped with paint, I think. And I thought, do I just paint strip this guy and do it again? Actually, no, I can probably rescue it. So you can see there's not a lot of detail there. So what I've done, I've actually painted on the strands of hair individually, because that's mostly just a big flat mass, that bit of hair, that beard. So rather than paint stripping it, I just paint on the strands individually and then highlight them as if they actually exist. I think that's been quite effective, but then it's not this guy anyway. He's going to be in the bolt thrower crew in a second and not this guy. So yeah, I just seem to take the pictures of the war machines with just any old crew member back in the day when I was taking these photos. And there's a goblin in a cage, which is from the miner's kit as well. You can tell from the candles on it. So this is, again, it's a bit dirty and dingy, but do with some highlights. And there we go. So this is the correct crewman with it now. So I've brightened up the bolt thrower. I painted some little decorations on it, and everyone else has just got brighter, and their beard is more vibrant. And I quite like this one. This guy's beard is actually incredibly stiff, and it comes out at a strange angle. It's just a solid piece. It doesn't dangle down onto his chest. It's like flapping up into the air as he lifts his head. And I've done some little highlights to the edge of the bolt feathers as well. So you can see again these little clothing highlights. Now when you go really close to them, it looks kind of weird, but on the table, I think that looks good. The goblin in the cage has been highlighted as well and has gained eyeballs. But I wanted him to look really enraged, so I didn't actually add pupils. I was going to, and I thought, actually, it looks cool like that. He looks really fed up and angry. And again, I'm very happy with this one. This was the first dwarf war machine that I fully painted, actually. This would have been when I was doing my army in 2000. So I had the cannon originally, but I didn't actually paint that first. I also had an old organ gun back then, which I eventually got rid of. I wish I hadn't got rid of not only the organ gun, but I also had a load of the classic Quarrelers and Thunderers. So the ones that had the kind of fabric hats with the guns, the crossbows as well. Yeah, they had a lot of funny hats back then, the dwarves. So I wish I hadn't got rid of loads of those. I had a couple of slayers as well. I didn't have a full unit. I think I had the command group, and that may have been it. But that was my first attempt at doing a dwarf army. But I didn't really fully embrace the dwarf lifestyle until the year 2000, which would have been, was that 5th or 6th edition that was released around 2000. It was the one that had Empire and Orcs in the starter box. So that was the time that I fully embraced the dwarven lifestyle. Now we move on to possibly my favourite dwarf model, which is the second version of the organ gun, as far as I know. There may be an earlier one than the first one I'm aware of. And this one I painted because I was going to Adepticon to play my first ever Warhammer Fantasy tournament, and I only had one organ gun at the time. So I bought this one, which I also owned back in the day, but I'd got rid of it. So I bought this one on eBay, because I wanted to have two different organ guns, and the other one I had was the more modern one. So I bought this and I painted it in, it would have been 2014. And I actually think I did a decent job on this. I think the crew look pretty good actually, because they've got eyeballs, they've got teeth. So yeah, I was capable of doing that back in the day. There's no real clothing highlights though. So these ones don't need a vast amount of work on them because there's already some cool stuff done on them. So they're just going to have some highlights added and that's going to be about it. So let's see. There we go. So you can still see the eyeballs, and you can see the eyeballs in this helmet as well. Some highlights on the beards. I think that blonde one again looks good. And highlights on the clothing. I've brightened up the machine as well. Edge highlighted the wheels, for example. And overall, just didn't have to do that much to this one, but I've changed the colour of the feathers on the helmet, so they're metallic now instead of white. And I've added the metal rim to this barrel that he's carrying as well, on top of all the highlights. So, one of my favourite models. I think these might be the 3 coolest crew members as a group. They have a lot more character than the modern organ gun crew, which we'll get to in a minute because I did add some paint to that as well. But these old War Machine crew, even the bolt thrower as well, very cool, very interesting poses, facial expressions. These ones I think are really great. I like this guy. He looks like a little tin can with his little helmet on as well. Even though I've painted this just blue, you could easily do that as armour. Let's see. Oh, we've got a donation in the chat from Gilthos. Oh, very kind. Let's hit like on that. There we go. Thank you very much. And Perfidy says, never quite worked out what the swabber is doing with his hat. Let's see. He seems to be holding it up in the air for some reason. I don't know. Maybe that's the signal that it's ready to fire. That's all I can think of. So if he's standing at the front and he's finished swabbing the barrels, I don't know whether that stick would actually fit in those barrels, to be honest with you. But anyway, when he's finished swabbing them out and it's ready to be fired, there you go, lifts up his helmet, that's the signal. Then maybe this guy with the axe hits the lever and it fires. Surely can't be this guy because he's already carrying this hefty barrel, so he's quite busy, isn't he? But maybe my favourite dwarf model of all time, this particular organ gun, could well be. You can see I've actually highlighted the silver on these rings of it as well. I assume those are going to be used to tow it into battle. But just very good, very characterful crew. I really like this era of dwarf war machines and war machine crew, the mid-90s. Then we've got some heroes, and when were these painted? So the Runesmith and the Rune Lord. I think the Runesmith was painted back in the day, so that would have been year 2000. The Rune Lord was a bit more recent. I had the model. This is actually a model I've had for a really long time as well, this one. But I never painted it back in the day. But I held on to it, much like the cannon from the mid-90s. So I've had this one for a very long time. And I think it used to have a banner as well, but I didn't feel like having a banner on his back, so I cut that bit off and then kind of green stuffed the cloak to match the texture. So there's my Slayer with an enhanced pair of butt cheeks and an enhanced pair of axe heads as well. So these aren't the original axe heads. I can't remember what they're from, but they're bigger than the originals. And I also enlarged his butt cheeks with green stuff as well. Half his beard green, but mostly quite messy. And then this guy was painted to be my BSB, because it was kind of a ragtag bunch of models and bits of the modern dwarves, and by modern I mean, when would these guys have come out, this kit? This must have been like mid-2000s probably, this dwarf kit. So this was during the period when I wasn't playing Warhammer, but then when I got back into it I picked up some Battle for Skull Pass Miners and Battle for Skull Pass Thunderers, and some random bits as well, because obviously I've got them from the miners. I've got the goblin in a cage and a few other random bits as well, and I added some extra Quarrelers in the new style as well, which you'll see when we get to that unit. But this guy was just with some of the leftover bits. I thought I'll make a BSB, why not? But obviously nothing too fancy going on with him back when I painted him the first time, not even any symbol on the banner. And then this was my first go at rejuvenating them. There has actually been more added, which I'll show you in a minute, especially on the BSB. I have actually painted something on his banner now. But there is Alric Big Butts, the legendary slayer, who has been highlighted significantly, and his skin has been made to look a bit more interesting rather than just this flesh wash over the original base coat. And the Rune Lord, I've actually given a darker skin tone as well, to add a bit of visual variety in there. This Runesmith, some highlighting going on. And from the back you can see where this guy originally had a banner pole back in the day. Some highlights onto the cloak. I may actually go and do these even brighter at some point as well, these highlights, if I feel like it. Now, this Runesmith here, the book that he carries on his belt, that, I don't think it's that corner that you can see has got a little bit of a highlight or something on there. I think it was the other corner. He would nudge up against models in the unit that he was in. Because obviously these dwarves barely fit on the bases that they were provided with, so I'm not too displeased that they've moved on to larger bases now, these dwarves. But back in the day, his book used to nudge up against the other metal models in the unit, which probably would have been Ironbreakers. And that bit of paint on that corner of the book there would constantly chip off. So that's not going to happen anymore because they're on much more generous bases. But yes, you can see the butt cheeks. Yes, they're not supposed to be that big. They were especially enlarged with green stuff. And there's even a close-up for you. There you go. And this is the BSB with even more work done to him. So if we go back a sec, you can see I didn't actually address the gold horn situation because I decided I was going to go in and paint all the horns in a bone colour. So I've actually done it with this guy as well, but I don't know if there's a picture of him. But the BSB, there we go, horn colour has changed to bone. And to do these kind of bone coloured horns, it's just a bone colour and then a bone, I think I've used a bone contrast or just a darker wash over the top of it, and then painted on it again, leaving any recessed bits, because occasionally you'll get little dents in the horns. They're not all perfectly smooth, and round the bottom there I'll leave that darker. And then just gradient highlight up, so a slightly lighter shade of bone starting about halfway up, and then a little white tip on them as well. This symbol here, I went through the old dwarf army books to look at the runes, so if anyone is fluent in the dwarf runic language can tell me what that says, then I'll be very impressed. And this is the symbol that a lot of the dwarf banners have on them over the years. This actually took quite a bit of effort to get the lines even this good, and they're obviously not perfect, but for my freehand standards that's actually good. That's not something I do often. I've also added, if we go back, you can see compared to here, I then went back in and added even more highlights on the banner as well and the clothing. Now, we've got some Thunderers. So these are a mixture of the really nice aiming down the barrel Thunderers that I got back in, let's see, I probably got these ones around the year 2000. So these aren't the really old Thunderers that I originally had, which are even more characterful actually than these ones. And they're combined with the Battle for Skull Pass Thunderers. So that was my plan when I got back into Warhammer. I thought, I've got a few of these Thunderers left, I'll put them on the front rank and use these not very exciting Battle for Skull Pass Thunderers in the back rank. So, let's have a look. Now, I think this unit is quite a serious transformation, and it's all to do with the faces. Because these guys at the back, here, I don't think they look good at all. I don't think those paint jobs do them any favours whatsoever. And then if we teleport into the future, suddenly, they have character. Like this champion here, he's got kind of a worried look on his face now. If we go back, you can't really tell what's going on with his face. Suddenly, look at that, he's got shock on his face. So yeah, I'm very happy with how these have come out. The faces on the Battle for Skull Pass Dwarves actually do paint up very nice. They give you quite a bit of eyeball to work with. These ones have mostly got their eyes closed, the aiming down the barrel metal ones. So there's a bit less you can do with them, but they're just cool models in the first place. So you can see some of the highlighting going on there on the gloves. The reds aren't as bold a highlight, so I don't want to go too bright with them because then you have to go kind of pink or orange when you're highlighting it, and I'd rather just have a slightly paler red. So it's not as striking as the blue, but I think that's fine. And I like that face at the back there. That just looks cool, doesn't it? I've also done the horns in the same style as I described as well. So you can see the slight gradient and then the white tip on the horns. Other than that, the beards have all been highlighted again, just like all the other units. And the descent into madness is continuing because all these units are taking longer and longer each time I do a new one. So onto the Quarrelers, who you can see do have some of the more modern style of dwarf as well. Just a few in the front rank aiming down the crossbow and one reloading the crossbow as well. Because originally, you used to get dwarves in a box of 20 with a movement tray. So the first box I got, I made them into 20 dwarf warriors with hand weapon and shield. The next box I made into great weapon dwarves. And then the next box I made into Quarrelers, but because I wanted the great weapon dwarves to have even more in it, I sacrificed some of this unit. So I took 4 out of the crossbows, so I only made, I think, 12. Am I going to make a fool of myself when I try and count them now? Let's see if that's actually right. I made 16. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16. That's about right. And then, yes, I stole 4 out of their unit and made great weapons out of them. And the great weapons I haven't actually repainted yet because they're not a priority, because I don't think they're necessary at the moment to run my army the way I want to run it. So this unit was put down to 16 from the 20 that you get in the box. So when I got these extra bodies and just a random assortment of dwarf bits, I made them into Quarrelers so I could round out the unit. And there's their transformation, so I think this is quite a significant one as well. And because these are some of the later units that I've done, I think the beards are looking especially cool now. Especially the blonde ones like these as well. I think they're quite a striking paint scheme. This beard as well, quite like that style, that particular head. There's not many of them in the unit. I've done the horns on this one as well, and this is one of the units where, obviously, I've gone a bit further with the blue highlighting than on some of the earlier ones, and I think it's definitely worth it. I think these look very cool. I've brightened up the banner as well. If we go back, you can see that it's quite dark and dingy. Brightened that up significantly, and overall, just very happy with how these are coming out. Like these a lot. They're cool little faces, they're cool little eyes. Even if they're looking off to the side quite a lot, I just find that easier to paint. And we've got some skin tone diversity in there as well. And onto the modern organ gun. So you can see immediately these crew just don't have the same flavour as the old ones. I'm going to go back and look at the old organ gun crew just to remind us how flavourful they are. But look at that. Look at the character that's oozing out of these three here. Each one, you can kind of figure out what's going on in their mind at the time, can't you? While they're posing to be sculpted. Whereas these multi-part ones, which are right here, they don't quite have the same energy to them. Which is sad, because they're actually very nice, detailed models. They're just lacking a little bit of flavour and character. And there we go. So they've got the old highlights as well on the beards. On the actual war machine itself, I've mostly added some colour variety to it. So the wheels have got this kind of brassy colour added it on here. And there's a few little extra bits done as well. You can see under there I've added that same colour, just to add a bit of variety. They've all got eyeballs, as you can see. This guy's looking down. This one's quite a cool model, but these two, I'm not getting a lot of flavour from them. They're kind of generic looking, these two, aren't they? Perfidy likes the Thunderers with the fur-lined hats and the dragon barrels. Yep, very cool. So, this organ gun, not the biggest fan of this model, but I do want to have all the organ guns. So there's one more I need to buy, which is the old 80s organ gun. And I've been looking on eBay. So they are out there, and it's not that expensive compared to what I thought I might end up paying for one of them. So I might just buy a third organ gun, because I want to try a list with 3 anyway, and I'd want them all to look different. Now, back to round about the year 2000, when I was painting this guy to match my Ironbreakers, which is why he's this kind of dirty silver colour. And the beard didn't really do it for me back then. It blends in a bit, and obviously his mustache and eyebrows are supposed to be armour, but I've painted them the same colour as his beard because I was a foolish child back then. Other than that, he just looks a little bit flat and dreary. So, there he is, brightened up a bit. And gold eyebrows, gold mustache, the teeth a bit more visible. A bit of colour variety added onto the weapon as well, and brightened up these giant metallic wings on his helmet. The beard has also had a bit of a rework, so it's got some highlights going on there, so you can actually see that it is beard, and it doesn't just blend seamlessly into his dirty armour like it did before. Overall, just brightened him up. So, nothing too wild done to this one, just mostly brightening him up. Now onto the Anvil of Doom. Now, I was fairly happy with how this was painted, because this was another that was painted quite late by the army standards. So this would have been probably 2013, 2012-ish. So it's alright. It's not too bad. And because it's more modern, obviously I haven't gone totally crazy with the flesh wash and just really sunburnt them. But there we go. I think you'll agree that is much cooler. So first of all, it's on a base now, because I just think that looks nicer, fits in with the rest of the army, and it's not going to get paint chipped off it whenever I pick it up. The other main thing, other than just the beard highlights, which obviously were going to happen because that's a staple of all these units that I've been redoing a bit, the horns are now no longer gold, which I felt didn't really add anything. It didn't look particularly fancy. It kind of just blends in with the colours of the gold on the anvil. But now, there you go, it's nice gradient horn colour on all three of their helmets. I think that adds quite a lot, actually. I think that looks cool. I've highlighted the flesh on the rune master at the back there. And I'm not sure if he had eyeballs back then, but he certainly does now. These two actually have eyeballs inside the helmets painted on as well. I don't know if you can actually see. I think you can just about see that eyeball there, but they are deep within the helmets. They are difficult to spot. Perfidy says, it always surprises me that the older Dark Elf bolt thrower is so much cheaper on eBay than the more recent one. It's very strange how certain models are way more in demand than others. And some models that have got modern equivalents, I suppose, maybe aren't as in demand, because if you want to field that unit, you can just buy the modern one. So I'm thinking about the organ gun specifically now. If people want an organ gun, how many people have nostalgia for the old organ gun rather than they just want to have one in their list? I don't know. So yeah, because there has been an organ gun available in plastic, maybe the older ones aren't as ridiculously sought after because they're not unique as such in terms of army list building. But for people that just want the models because they're cool, people like me, then obviously they are highly sought after. So there's the Anvil of Doom. And then we move on to the Battle for Skull Pass cannon with the telescope from the plastic organ gun and cannon kit. So, heavily sunburnt, especially the top of this guy's head. Look at that, that's crazy. It looks like he's going to be peeling like mad. And again, these models, how much character have they got for War Machine Crew? I would say this guy actually looks quite interesting. The other two are fairly generic. You can't really tell much going on with this guy at the back. I think this guy is kind of cool and unique looking though, this one. Not so much those two, just pretty much what you'd expect. They're not multi-part, so obviously the sculptors decide entirely how the pose is going to help with whatever they're trying to convey. So that is one thing that's to be said for single pose miniatures. Whatever was intended by the designer, they can fully get their vision across and you're not able to tinker with it. Which sometimes is an improvement, obviously, when you can position the limbs and the head yourself. Then you can kind of conjure up something that maybe wasn't in the design originally. But I think this guy is definitely the coolest. So what we're going to do here, there we go, lots of highlights of the flesh. This guy looking slyly off to one side, which I think makes him look very cool. The beard ties as well, which I didn't paint originally back then. Overall, just brightening up the crew. The cannon itself I've added some extra colour to it, and then the telescope, this is the first time I've tried to do this lens look. So if you look there, in the old days, I just put gloss varnish on the lens and let natural light do the work. Here, I actually looked up some tutorials on how to paint lenses and tried to mimic that as best I could. And it's kind of dark all over, and then a lighter half a ring, I would say, around there, and then a smaller one on this side, which is where the light's entering. So you then have a small dot in the center of it, and then there is actually a bit of highlighting on the other side, opposite from where the light enters. It gets a bit lighter towards the center of this thing as well, towards the center of the highlight. And then I've tried to do the same thing on the upper lens as well. So I think that looks cool. Especially from a distance, that just looks like a nicely painted lens. Obviously, if you go really close, it looks a bit weird. Look at that. But it's not supposed to stand up to that level of scrutiny. Overall, I think this crew look pretty cool now. Especially this guy with his little sly sideways look. And there we go. So that is actually the last model that I have added highlights to in this army. So you can see all these extra bits of work I'm doing to the models, if we go all the way back to the start, haven't been reflected in some of the earlier ones that I added to. So the hammerers and the ironbreakers, I think I'm probably going to go back to and add even more to, because by the time we get to this stage where I'm adding ridiculous highlights everywhere, and so after we've looked at them all as well, I think this guy is still my favourite beard paint job in the army, this one here. I think that looks really cool. Gyrocopter, I really enjoy my paint job on that, although it's not the most practical model to use with it being metal. And I'm going to get some more gyrocopters when they bring those back. These dwarf warriors, they don't have the super bright blue highlights on these ones, so anything from this point back I'm going to be adding a little bit to at some point, but it's not urgent. Perfidy says, I really rate your redhead anvil guard's beard paint job. Let's go back and look at that then. If it's getting special attention, I suppose I should go and have a quick look. Where is the anvil? It's coming up shortly. There we go. So, the red haired. Yeah, I suppose that's pretty cool as well. I still like the blonde guy with the hammer though. So let's go back right to the start and I'll tell you what I'm going to do to some of the units that didn't get as much of a touch up. So all the War Machine crew I think are done. I like those. Like them how they are. Plenty of highlights going on there. Gyrocopter, cool. Dwarf Warriors may get an extra blue highlight at some point when I feel like it. The Miners as well, the extra bright blue just on the corners for highlights as well, they can be added. But overall I think these look really cool already. I think it's the massive beards, because they're such a feature of the Battle for Skull Pass Dwarves. The beards are so huge and covering most of the front of the model in some cases. If you do a good highlight job on those and then the faces, then that kind of carries the rest of it. So even though I didn't add anything really to the weapons, that's not really the focus of the model because the beards are so huge and colourful. You get drawn to this whole area, and the candles as well. Ironbreakers, I could definitely do more to them because all I've done is fix their beards and turned the eyebrows and mustaches into armour, which is what they're supposed to be. So they could be amended. I could brighten up their shields actually. Rather than being black, I could paint them maybe half blue, half red to match the colour scheme for the rest of the army and tie them in a bit more. Let me know if you think that's a good idea before I go and butcher my Ironbreakers unit. The hammerers are going to get some highlights on their weapon shafts. I'm going to do eyeballs on all the hammerers in the back ranks as well, rather than just the command models. Even though you can barely see the eyes on these other guys, occasionally people are going to crouch down at the table and look closely, so they'll get a bit more attention. But overall, very happy with how this army has come out, and not quite finished yet, but for now, this is how they're going to rest for the time being while I paint some Bretonians. And I've got, I think, 24 peasant bowmen on my painting table right now, which I'm painting in a, spoiler alert, orange and white and green colour scheme. So that's going to be my Bretonian Lord's colour scheme, and then the knights are all going to have their own individual schemes. So, here we go, here's the dwarves in all their glory. Not quite repainted, but that wasn't the goal. They are touched up, highlighted, improved, and I think it's made quite a big difference on the table. Because you may well have a respect for these old miniatures when you see them opposite you, but if the paint jobs are firmly rooted in my previous level of painting skill, then I don't think it's really a fair reflection of what I'm trying to bring to a game of Warhammer. I think that is much more fair. I think they look very cool, and you want your opponent to see something cool across the table, even if they just look cool so your opponent can kill a cool looking thing and then you take it off the table. That's what you want to do. You want your army to look cool, you want your opponent's army to look cool, and then they go and do cool stuff and kill each other. Just pausing on that beard again. Definitely my favourite beard. So let me know what your favourite beard is from the army in the comments, or in the live chat if you're here live as well. But in the comments, what's your favourite beard across the whole army, and why? Is it because of the sculpting job on the beard, or is it specifically my highlights that have done it? Or just the colour choice? Let me know. And then this one, my favourite model, the organ gun, very characterful crew. Especially this guy waving his helmet in the air. And the actual machine just looks very nice as well. Alric Big Butts with his enlarged butt cheeks. Okay, we'll leave it resting on his butt cheeks actually while we close up the video. So, the next bit of Old World content, I'm hoping to get another game of Old World in next week at the gaming club. So probably next Friday there'll be another battle report. The next Old World tournament, let me have a quick look at my calendar now so I can let you know what's coming up. On the events section of my notebook here, cracking it open. So, the Old World, let's see. Ooh, there is one there's definitely one at the start of June. We're in May now, aren't we? So that's a month away. There may well be another one before then. Mid-May, I'm running a couple of events. I'm running a Dead Zone and a Kings of War event. And yeah, I'll keep my eyes peeled for the other events though. And you're going to see probably weekly battle reports still. Most weeks anyway. I'm not going to play Old World every single week because there are other game systems as well, but most weeks I imagine it'll be Old World battle report. And I have a couple of other video ideas for the Old World as well, maybe looking through some of the old Dwarf army books and comparing them, but I might save that for when the Dwarf Arcane Journal comes out so I can compare that to the old army books and see if anything's drastically changed. I think that would be a cool video to do. Perfidy says, there are other game systems, are you sure? Well, yes. There's Kings of War, which I play. There is Dead Zone, Dreadball, Age of Sigmar. Relics is coming back, so I'll be playing that as well. I actually played my first game of Star Wars Shatterpoint as well yesterday. That was fun. That seems like a very well-designed game to me, actually. What I noticed about it is that the rules seem to be built so that everyone gets to do their cool stuff, rather than rules being built to prevent the enemy from doing cool stuff. So very positive game design, Star Wars Shatterpoint. So that's a big compliment coming from me there. So I don't know whether I'm going to play that regularly because there are already a lot of other game systems on the go. Stu has got a 40k tournament soon, but hoping to make it to an Old World one near the end of the month too. Excellent. When are you going to make it to an Old World event down here in Nottingham as well? That's the real question. That's what people really want to know. So, while you stare at the enlarged butt cheeks, don't forget to check out all the links in the description. There is various social media shenanigans down there. There's Facebook group, Twitter, Discord server, and all that good stuff. There is, obviously, if you haven't liked the video, you should be doing that immediately and subscribing. And if you want to keep the flow of content, non-stop stream of delightful, delicious, succulent, juicy videos onto your subscription page on a regular basis, then why not go and pledge all your life savings via Patreon or PayPal as well? Because that will mean I can attend more tournaments, report on them, buy more models, tell you how I've painted them, and do more battle reports non-stop. It's just a non-stop tide of wargaming action on this channel. It can't be stopped. Stu says, soon, hoping to come to a TSN tournament or two this summer. Yes, the TSN Arena is the place to be for all the cool kids playing Old World tournaments, and Age of Sigmar for that matter. So, let's wrap this video up then. Let's see, how long has it been going? 55 minutes? Yeah, that's pretty good. I think that's a good analysis of my paint jobs. If you've got comments on the paint work, or you think there's anything you've spotted that could be improved upon next time I go in with a paintbrush and tinker with the dwarfs further, then leave that in the comments as well. And all that remains to be said is, good night out there, whatever you are.